So let's talk about the running contact method. What we're moving towards these days is quite an evolution from where running contacts actually started. We're actually moving towards being able to do quite a bit of the training away from the equipment and not doing so much of the technical and repetition that used to be required. My very first dog to have a running contact literally just chased a ball down the dog walk, and we did about 1 million dog walks. Knowing what I know now, that probably wasn't the best thing for his body, but that was the only method they have. And luckily for all of us, we have learned a better way to do this. So now we're going to go through the steps of the running method. And for this, there's going to be 6 steps. The first one is the mat on the flat or on the ground. At this point, we're teaching a foot awareness for the dog to understand that we want them to make contact with the target with their feet and the desire to do so. And then step 2, we're going to start adding movement. More momentum from the dog as well as momentum from the handler always makes hitting the target a little bit more challenging. And then for step 3, we're going to move that target that our dogs now understand how to hit with their feet to a plank. It can either be a single plank off the dog walk or just a made at home plank. And it starts either on the flat or raised at a very low height, possibly on a table or a cinder block. And then step 4, we're going to actually move that behavior to a low obstacle. So whether that's the dog walk or the A-frame, we're going to start the dog negotiating the obstacle at a lower height. And then step 5, obviously at some point we're going to move this obstacles up to full height, and now they're going to be doing the behavior on a descending plank, which of course also brings gravity and momentum into play. And then step 6, remove or not to remove. This is kind of something that comes up sometimes, whether or not you leave the target on the contact, and that's something that we will talk about a little later on as some differences in my method versus some of the other common methods, but it does vary. So now we're going to talk about the desired performance for the criteria of the running. And the basics of this is first, continued speed as defined by the word running. We want the dogs to be accelerating up, across, and down the board, as well as after onto the next obstacle. We do want them to actually accelerate through the contact zone, their paws obviously to be making contact with that zone. We also will need to be working on various turns from the descending plank. Unfortunately, judges do not always design straight exits off the contacts. So we do have to be able to handle different degrees of turns, and those can be cued with either physical cues, verbal cues, or a combination of the two. And now we're going to talk about a few of the things that are no longer part of the program in training running contact. And the first thing is the counting your dog's stride and knowing how to adjust that based on your dog's hang time. That sounds super complicated, and actually it is. We're no longer worried about those things, more so just making sure that the dog understands their job. And the next part that we no longer worry about is our dog's body language, head and tail position. The dog's running full speed and they have the confidence to do so. They're going to do that in the manner that is easiest for that particular dog with their build and their structure. And then training time, 9 to 15 months of training with the majority of work on equipment. Like I said, I've done thousands of dog walks with my first dog that had a running contact, and that's no longer necessary, which is really great thing, both for us who may not always have lots of exposure to full equipment because we don't have it at home, and also really good for the dogs because they don't really need the wear and tear on full equipment all the time. So then there are a few other skills that we need to make sure that the dogs are capable of doing that come in conjunction with the running. Dog independence, obstacle focus, and forward focus. Those are really important at pretty much everywhere on the agility course, but even more so for the running contacts because they happen very quickly. So you need to have some really good obstacle commitment and have your dog be able to drive forward whether or not you are ahead of them. You want to trust your training. Once you've trained it and you get into the trial environment, this is, I think, one of the most freeing skills for running contacts is you just go. So there's no managing or adjusting for trying to help your dog hit the contact. And it's really important that it is an independent skill. And then the turn options, as we talked about, those can be both physical, verbal, or a combination of the two things, but you're definitely going to have the ability to cue your dog the different exit options off both the A-frame and the dog walk. So now we're going to talk about the pros and cons of the running method. And so for the pros, the first we're talking about, it can lead to faster contact performance, although that's the obvious. It is definitely true. It can be helpful for straight lines on the course after the obstacles. As your dog has built up momentum, you get to keep that momentum and benefit from it. Then we have that most of the training is done off the equipment, because this is a fairly new development, and I think really important for the dogs to be able to do most of it on the flat, as well as you don't have to have a large space in order to do it. The method can apply to the dog walk or the A-frame, or both if you so choose. And it is not reliant on handler location. This is another kind of thing that used to be, people were worried about you had to outrun your dogs. Believe me, I cannot outrun my dogs, but I am still able to have successful contact performance. And then we have the cons of the running method. Just with any method, there's always some negatives. And the first one is that at some point you do have to have access to full contacts. I don't know anybody that has successfully taught a running contact without access at some point to the full-size contact equipment. It does happen a lot quicker due to the movement of the dog, and for some people that is a con. They like the opportunity to be able to catch up with their dog or have a moment to think, and you definitely don't have that if you're running. Neglecting to train exit commands for directionals, that is definitely something that if you are not capable of physically being down the board and you don't train verbal and lateral cues that you can use to be able to let your dog know where to go when there's that off-course tunnel right in front of them, they're going to take it, and that is definitely not a perk for trying to qualify. And then the judge does need to be able to see the foot hit in order to get you that clean run, and at speed that can be challenging to see. Luckily for us, I think as judges have evolved, this has gotten better, but it is definitely possible that your dog could hit the yellow and your judge did not see it. So now we're going to talk about the training time involved in the running method. With my method, it's approximately 3 to 5 months. And as I mentioned, 2/3 of that is training without equipment, but it is definitely a fairly extensive foundation on the flat to make sure you have all the pieces to the puzzle that will work when you're ready to actually put it on the equipment. It is, I believe, something that once it's trained, as I mentioned, you just run. You might have to brush up on some challenges, exit challenges that your dog may struggle with, but on the whole, it doesn't require a lot of maintenance once it is taught correctly. So our expert tip for you here is great foundation training, a super solid contact performance. And this really goes for all of agility. Great foundations are super important for anything that you are teaching your dog, and contacts are definitely not an exception to this.
Unlock the full story right here. SpotOnAgility.com/contact training.